This presentation is on understanding the Bitcoin white paper. So Bitcoin, a peer-to-peer electronic cash system, was released on Halloween, October 31 of 2008. The author is Satoshi Nakamoto. Satoshi Nakamoto is a pseudonym, so we don't know who the real author or authors are. I do believe this is the best white paper I have read in the computer science field. And it's quite possibly the best computer science white paper ever written, which would imply that it was written by more than one person. But again, we don't know whether it's one person or a group who wrote this. All right, let's begin with the abstract. A purely peer-to-peer version of electronic cash would allow online payments to be sent directly from one party to another without going through a financial institution. So the author or authors want a version of electronic cash that doesn't require a financial institution. So if we think about how payments are currently made online using credit cards or debit cards, when you buy something from an online merchant, your payment is actually using a financial institution, your bank or your credit card company or PayPal or somebody like that. However, if I want to buy something using cash at a physical grocery store, for example, I just give dollar bills. The banking system isn't involved at all. I just take some dollar bills out of my wallet. Now, if I use a credit card, then I am again using the financial institution, or if I use my debit card. But if I'm using just regular cash in my wallet, no financial institutions involved. And so the goal here is to have an electronic version of cash. All right, so the second sentence says, digital signatures provide part of the solution. The main benefits are lost if a trusted third party is still required to prevent double spending. We propose a solution of the double spending problem using a peer-to-peer network. The network timestamps transactions by hashing them into an ongoing chain of hash-based proof of work, forming a record that cannot be changed without redoing the proof of work. The longest chain not only serves as proof of the sequence of events witnessed, but proof that it came from the largest pool of CPU power. As long as the majority of CPU power is controlled by nodes that are not cooperating to attack the network, they'll generate the longest chain and outpace attackers. The network itself requires minimal structure. Messages are broadcast on a best effort basis, and nodes can leave and rejoin the network at will, accepting the longest proof of work chain as proof of what happened while they were gone. So most of the paper is explaining this solution in detail. We'll talk about, digital signatures are part of the solution, but they also need to have this peer-to-peer network that timestamps the transactions by hashing the transactions into an ongoing chain of proof of work. And then we'll talk about how that chain is not only a proof of what happened, but it also protects the network from attackers. And that nodes can leave and rejoin the network at will. And when they rejoin, they just use that proof of work chain to be evidence for what happened while they were not connected. All right, so let's dive into the details here. Section 1 is our background or introduction. Commerce on the internet has come to rely almost exclusively on financial institutions serving as trusted third parties to process electronic payments. While the system works well enough for most transactions, it still suffers from the inherent weakness of the trust-based model. Completely non-reversible transactions are not really possible since financial institutions cannot avoid mediated disputes. The cost of mediation increases transaction costs, limiting the minimum practical transaction size and cutting off the possibility for small casual transactions. And there's a broader cost and loss of ability to make non-reversible payments for non-reversible services. With the possibility of reversal, the need for trust spreads. Merchants must be wary of their customers, hassling them for more information than they would otherwise need. A certain percentage of fraud is accepted as unavoidable. These costs and payment uncertainties can be avoided in person by using physical currency, but no mechanism exists to make payments over a communications channel without a trusted party. So for example, this is, and we think about it in person, there are some merchants that only accept cash for small purchases because they don't want to have to deal with credit cards and the fees and the possibility of reversal. There's some and so what would be nice is to have an electronic version of that So the online merchant could also do that. They could just accept this online electronic cash that's not reversible and it has lower transaction costs and payment uncertainties. So the authors continue to say what is needed is an electronic payment system based on cryptographic proof instead of trust, allowing any two willing parties to transact directly with each other without the need for a trusted third party like a bank or financial institution. Transactions that are computationally impractical to reverse would protect sellers from fraud, and routine escrow mechanisms could easily be implemented to protect buyers. In this paper, we propose a solution to the double spending problem using a peer-to-peer distributed timestamp server to generate computational proof of the chronological order of transactions. The system is secure as long as honest nodes collectively control more CPU power than any cooperating group of attacker nodes. Section 2 dives into transactions. We define an electronic coin as a chain of digital signatures. So here we're going to see a chain of transactions here. Each owner transfers the coin to the next by digitally signing a hash of the previous transaction and the public key of the next owner and adding these to the end of the coin. A payee can verify the signatures to verify the chain of ownership. So here, for example, we have 3 transactions, basically trying to show, the digital ownership of this particular coin is passes between 3 different owners. So owner 1 is shown in this first block here, owner 2 is shown in the second block, and owner 3 is shown in the third block. And so when owner 0, who's off here to the left, passed his coin to owner 1, he's digitally signed it here. And so owner 1 now owns this coin and has owner 0's signature on it. When owner 1 wants to pay this coin over to owner 2, owner 1 will use their private key to digitally sign the coin, and then that's passed, and then now owner 2 has this coin. When owner 2 wants to pay this coin to owner 3, owner 2 will sign the coin using his private key, creating a digital signature, and now owner 3 has it. The reason why these public keys are passed in up here is so that we know who the new owner is. Owner 0 is paying the original coin to owner 1, and he used owner 1's public key to associate it with owner 1. Everyone has access to the public keys. Only the individual owner has access to their private keys. Again, following public key, private key cryptography. And we're using a chain of hashes to basically, accommodate this. The problem, of course, is the payee can't verify that one of the owners did not double spend the coin. The common solution is to introduce a trusted central authority or mint that checks every transaction for double spending. After each transaction, the coin must be returned to the mint, issue a new coin, and only coins issued directly from the mint are trusted not to be double spent. The problem with this mint solution is that the fate of the entire money system depends on the company running the mint, for every transaction having to go through them, just like a bank. And in fact, several earlier solutions that depended on a bank mint actually failed. So we need a way for the payee to know the previous owner did not sign any earlier transactions. For our purposes, the earliest transaction is the one that counts. We don't care about later attempts to double spend, whether they're inadvertent or on purpose. The only way to confirm the absence of a transaction is to be aware of all transactions. In the mint-based model, the mint was aware of all transactions and decided which arrived first. To accomplish this without a trusted party like a mint, transactions must be publicly announced. We need a system for participants to agree on a single history of the order in which they were received. The payee needs proof that at the time of each transaction, the majority of nodes agreed it was the first transaction received. That brings us to section 3, timestamp server. The solution we propose begins with a timestamp server. Timestamp server works by taking a hash of a block of items to be timestamped and widely publishing the hash, such as a newspaper or a Usenet post. The timestamp proves that the data must have existed at the time, obviously, in order to get into the hash. Each timestamp includes the previous timestamp and its hash, forming a chain with each additional timestamp hash reinforcing the ones before it. So, for example, here is a block of data that's being put in the hash, and this hash is also linking to a previous hash of the chain to the left. And then the next hash will have linked to that hash, and it will have all this new data added, as well as linking again on and on the chain of blocks, often referred to as a blockchain. Section 4 is proof of work. To implement a distributed timestamp server on a peer-to-peer basis, we will need to use a proof of work system similar to Adam Back's Hashcash, rather than newspaper or Usenet posts. The proof of work involves scanning for a value that when hashed, such as with SHA-256, the hash begins with a number of 0 bits. The average work required is exponential in the number of 0 bits required and can be verified by executing a single hash. So, finding one leading 0 at the beginning of a SHA-256 output will take a certain amount of difficulty, but finding 2 zeros is significantly more difficult. And then finding 3 leading zeros is even more difficult than that. And so that's the idea, the number of 0 bits. As we increase that, that's going to exponentially increase the difficulty of doing the work to find an output that's acceptable. For our timestamp network, we implement the proof of work by incrementing a nonce in the block until a value is found that gives the block's hash the required number of 0 bits. Once the CPU effort has been expended to make it satisfy the proof of work, the block cannot be changed without redoing the work. As later blocks are chained after it, the work to change a block will include redoing all the blocks after it. So here's our example. We've got blocks, a previous hash, nonces, and transactions. And basically, we're using this nonce that's going to be incremented to attempt to discover a SHA-256 output that has the required number of 0 bits. The proof of work also solves the problem of determining representation in majority decision making. If the majority were based on one IP address, one vote, it can be subverted by anyone able to allocate many IPs. Proof of work is essentially one CPU, one vote. The majority decision is represented by the longest chain, which has the greatest proof of work effort invested in it. If a majority of CPU power is controlled by honest nodes, the honest chain will grow the fastest and outpace any competing chains. To modify a past block, an attacker would have to redo the proof of work of the block and all blocks after it, and then catch up with it and surpass the work of the honest nodes. We will show later that the probability of a slower attacker catching up diminishes exponentially as subsequent blocks are added. To compensate for increasing hardware speed and varying interest in running nodes over time, proof of work difficulty is determined by a moving average, targeting an average number of blocks per hour. If they're generated too fast, the difficulty increases. The steps to run the network are as follows. 1, new transactions are broadcast to all nodes. 2, each node collects new transactions in the whole block. 3, each node works on finding a difficult proof of work for its block. Number 4, when a node finds proof of work, it broadcasts the block to all nodes. 5, nodes accept the block only if all transactions in it are valid and not already spent. 6, nodes express their acceptance of the block by working on creating the next block of the chain using the hash of the accepted block as the previous hash. Nodes always consider the longest chain to be the correct one and will keep working on extending it. If 2 nodes broadcast different versions of the next block simultaneously, some nodes may receive one or the other first. In that case, they work on the first one they received, but save the other branch in case it becomes longer. Tie will be broken when the next proof of work is found and one branch becomes longer. Nodes who are working on the other branch will then switch to the longer one. New transaction broadcasts do not necessarily need to reach all nodes. As long as they reach many nodes, they will get into a block before long. Block broadcasts are also tolerant of dropped messages. If a node does not receive a block, it will request it when it receives the next block and realizes it missed one. 6 is incentive. By convention, the first transaction in the block is a special transaction that starts a new coin owned by the creator of the block. This adds an incentive for nodes to support the network and provides a way to initially distribute coins in circulation since there is no central authority to issue them. The steady addition of a constant amount of new coins is analogous to gold miners expending resources to add gold to circulation. In our case, his CPU time and electricity is expended. The incentive can also be funded with transaction fees. If the output value of a transaction is less than its input value, the difference as a transaction fee is added to the incentive value of the block in the transaction. Once a predetermined number of coins have entered circulation, the incentive can transition entirely to transaction fees to be completely inflation-free. The incentive may help encourage nodes to stay honest. If a greedy attacker is able to assemble more CPU power than all the honest nodes, he would have to choose between using it to defraud people by stealing back his payments or using it to generate new coins. He'll have to find it more profitable to play by the rules, such rules that favor him with more new coins than everyone else combined, than to undermine the system and the validity of his own wealth. And some people consider this incentive concept as the key innovation in this paper. Number 7, reclaiming disk space. Once the latest transaction and coin is buried in under enough blocks, the spent transactions before it can be discarded to save disk space. To facilitate this without breaking the block's hash, transactions are hashed in the Merkle tree, while only the root included in the block's hash. Old blocks can then be compacted by stubbing off branches of the tree. The interior hashes do not need to be stored. So let's take a look at what they're referring to. So we got this block, and then we've got another view of the block in a second. So let's look at the original Merkle tree. The Merkle tree is a tree of hashes. So we start off with these 4 transactions at the bottom, transactions 0 through 3, and then we generate a hash of each one. So we got hash 0, 1, 2, and 3. Then what we're going to do is we'll take hash 0 and hash 1, and we'll take a hash of the combination of those two. That becomes hash 0, 1. We do the same thing for 2 and 3. We create hash 2, 3. Then we take a hash of those two, hash 0, 1 and hash 2, 3, and that becomes our root hash. So we get this root hash that is now a hash of the 4 transactions combined through hashes as this tree of hashes. Now let's suppose that we're going to compact this old block by stubbing off branches of the tree. So we're essentially pruning transactions 0 through 2 off of here. So 0 and 1, they can be replaced by hash 01. Transaction 2 can be replaced by hash 2, and then we're saving transaction 3. But since we're saving these 3 here, we don't need hash 3 or hash 2, 3. We can just compute hash 3 and hash 2, 3. We compute hash 3 from transaction 3, and we compute hash 2, 3 from hash 2 and our computed hash 3. It allows us to verify the root hash just using these 2 hashes and transaction 3. A block header with no transactions would be about 80 bytes. If we suppose blocks are generated every 10 minutes, then that's 80 bytes times 6 per hour times 24 hours in a day times 365 days in a year gives us 4.2 megabytes per year. Well, computer systems typically selling with 2 gigabytes of RAM as of 2008 and Moore's law predicting current growth of 1.2 gigabytes per year, storage shouldn't be a problem even if the block headers must be kept in memory. Section 8 is simplified payment verification. It is possible to verify payments without running a full network node. The user only needs to keep a copy of the block headers of the longest proof of work chain, which he can get by querying network nodes until he's convinced he has the longest chain, and obtain the Merkle branch linking the transaction to the block it's timestamped in. He can't check the transaction for himself, but by linking it to a place in the chain, he can see if the network node has accepted it, and blocks added after it further confirm the network has accepted it. So this is our Merkle branch here for transaction 3. So if we know transaction 3 and we've got hash 2 and hash 1, we can confirm that transaction 3 is part of this Merkle root, and therefore it is on the blockchain. So even though we don't have a full copy of all the transactions, if we're just storing these block headers, which we said in the previous page is about 4 megabytes a year, then we know that transaction 3 was included in the blockchain. As such, the verification is reliable as long as honest nodes control the network, but it's more vulnerable if the network is overpowered by an attacker. While network nodes can verify transactions for themselves, the simplified method can be fooled by an attacker's fabricated transactions for as long as the attacker can continue to overpower the network. So this SPV approach, simplified payment verification, can be fooled if an attacker is taking control of the network. One strategy to protect against this would be to accept alerts from network nodes when they detect an invalid block, prompting the user's software to download the full block and alerting transactions to confirm the inconsistency. Businesses that receive frequent payments will probably still want to run their own nodes for more independent security and quicker verification. Combining and splitting value. Although it would be possible to handle coins individually, it would be unwieldy to make a separate transaction for every cent and transfer. To allow value to be split and combined, transactions contain multiple inputs and outputs. Normally, there will either be a single input from a larger previous transaction or multiple inputs combining smaller amounts. And at most 2 outputs, one for the payment and one returning the change, if any, back to the server, back to the sender. And if you think about it, this is kind of similar to spending dollar bills out of your wallet. If you're looking at your wallet, you might want to spend a $20 bill to buy something that costs less than $20 bills. So you just give a single input. Or maybe if something costs $16, you're pulling out a 5, a 10, and a 1 to reach $16. So you might have multiple inputs, or you might have a single input. And then your outputs would be the payment to the vendor, and maybe a payment for change if there's a change coming back to the sender. So here in this particular case, they're showing several inputs and 2 outputs, one for the payment to the vendor and one for the payment change going back to the original owner of the currency. It should be noted that fan out, where transaction depends on several transactions, and those transactions depend on many more, is not a problem here. There's never the need to extract a complete standalone copy of a transaction's history. We don't need to know where this currency came from originally, just like we don't need to know the full history of the dollar bills you're spending at the grocery store. Section 10 is on privacy. The traditional banking model achieves a level of privacy by limiting access to information of the parties involved, the trusted third party. The necessity to announce all transactions publicly precludes this method, but privacy can still be maintained by breaking the flow of information in another place, by keeping public keys anonymous. The public can see that someone is sending them out to someone else, but without information linking the transaction to anyone. This is similar to the level of information released by stock exchanges, where the time and size of individual trades, the tape is made public, but without telling who the parties were. So on this first line here, we've got our traditional privacy model, where identities, transactions, trusted third party, and counterparty are all private, and the public is outside. On the other hand, we've got this new privacy model where identities are still private, but the transactions are known to the public. As an additional firewall, a new key pair should be used for each transaction to keep them from being linked to a common owner. Some linking is still unavoidable with multi-input transactions, which necessarily reveal that their inputs were owned by the same owner. The risk is that if the owner of a key is revealed, linking could reveal other transactions that belong to the same owner. Section 11 is on calculations. We consider the scenario of an attacker trying to generate an alternate chain faster than the honest chain. Even if this is accomplished, it does not throw the system open to arbitrary changes, such as creating value out of thin air or taking money that never belonged to the attacker. Nodes are not going to accept an invalid transaction as payment, and honest nodes will never accept a block containing them. An attacker can only try to change one of his own transactions to take back money he recently spent. And so this goes back to the concept of digital signatures. So the attacker, because of digital signatures, the attacker can't spend your money. They can only try and essentially withdraw money they just spent at one place and spend it somewhere else. So the race between the honest chain and attacker chain can be characterized as binomial random walk. The success event is the honest chain being extended by 1 block, increasing its lead by +1. And the failure event is the attacker's version of the chain being extended by 1 block, reducing the gap by -1. The probability of an attacker catching up from a given deficit is analogous to a gambler's ruin problem. So if we think about the gambler's ruin problem, it's a probability problem. And the basic idea behind gambler's ruin is that if the casino has unlimited funds and the gambler has limited funds, and if the probability of winning at the casino is less than 50%, and the gambler keeps playing until either the gambler is broke or the gambler empties the amount of money that the casino has, eventually the gambler is going to go broke because the casino can never run out of money. Now, if your casino can run out of money, then there's a slightly different problem. But let's take a look at this version. This version is, suppose a gambler with unlimited credit starts at a deficit and plays potentially an infinite number of trials to try to reach break even. We can calculate the probability that the gambler ever reaches break even or that an attacker ever catches up with the honest chain as follows. P is the probability an honest node finds the next block. Q is the probability the attacker finds the next block. And then Q of Z is the probability the attacker will catch up from Z blocks behind. And so the more blocks behind the attacker is, the worse it gets. So Q of Z equals 1 if P is less than or equal to Q. So if the probability the attacker finds the next block is greater than or equal to the probability of the honest nodes, that is, the attacker has more CPUs than the honest nodes do, then the probability the attacker will catch up is 1. Yes, the attacker is going to catch up. However, if the probability of P, that of honest nodes finding the next block, is greater than the attacker finding the next block, then the probability of the attacker catching up becomes Q divided by P to the Z power. So let's think about this for a second. What does Q divided by P to the Z power mean? Well, Q again is the probability the attacker finds the next block. And we've already said that P is greater than Q. So Q over P is a fraction. It's going to be point something. And we're going to raise that fraction to the power of Z, which is the number of blocks behind. So if we look at this, we'll show an example in a minute. But basically, given our assumption that P is greater than Q, the probability drops exponentially as the number of blocks the attacker has to catch up with increases. With the odds against him, if he doesn't make a lucky lunge forward early on, his chances become vanishingly small as he falls further behind. We now consider how long the recipient of a new transaction needs to wait before being sufficiently certain the sender can't change the transaction. We assume the sender is an attacker who wants to make the recipient believe he paid him for a while, then switch it back to pay it back to himself after some time has passed. The receiver will be alerted when that happens, but the sender hopes it will be too late. So the receiver generates a new key pair and gives a public key to the sender shortly before signing. This prevents the sender from preparing a chain of blocks ahead of time by working on it continuously until he is lucky enough to get far enough ahead then executing the transaction at that moment. Once the transaction is sent, the dishonest sender starts working in secret on a parallel chain containing an alternate version of his transaction. The recipient waits until the transaction has been added to a block and Z blocks have been linked after it. He doesn't know the exact amount of progress the attacker's made, but assuming the honest blocks took the average expected time per block, the attacker's potential progress will be a Poisson distribution with expected value. Here we show the formula. To get the probability the attacker could still catch up now, we multiply the Poisson density for each amount of progress it could have made by the probability to catch up at that point. Here we're showing the formula again. Rearranging to avoid summoning the infinite tail distribution, we now have this final formula. And now we have a C code version of it. We're showing our P values and Q values, our lambda and our sum, and then going through a for loop, walking through it based on exactly how far behind you are. Running some results using our C program, we see the probability drops off exponentially as the number of blocks behind gets greater. So, if the blocks behind is 1, probability catching up is only 0.2 for this Q value of 0.1. But when you're 10 blocks behind, now you've got like 5.5 zeros and then 0.12. So your odds of catching up at that point are really slim. Now, if Q value is 0.3, then you've got somewhat better odds of catching up, but it still gets pretty bad. And here we're showing for P less than 0.1%. So in conclusion, we proposed a system for electronic transactions without relying on trust. We started with the usual framework of coins made from digital signatures, which provides strong control of ownership, but is incomplete without a way to prevent double spending. To solve this, we proposed a peer-to-peer network using proof of work to record a public history of transactions that quickly becomes computationally impractical for an attacker to change if honest nodes control a majority of CPU power. The network is robust in its unstructured simplicity. Nodes work all at once with little coordination. They do not need to be identified, since messages are not routed to any particular place, only need to be delivered on a best effort basis. Nodes can leave and rejoin the network at will, accepting the proof of work chain as proof of what happened while they were gone. They vote with their CPU power, expressing their acceptance of valid blocks by working on extending them and rejecting invalid blocks by refusing to work on them. Any needed rules and incentives can be enforced with this consensus mechanism. There's a number of references, which I'm going to go over in a future paper and a future presentation. I will also provide some other related presentations as well. So thank you for listening to this introductory lecture on understanding the Bitcoin white paper.